Hello and welcome to the King Pair podcast. Let's talk about women's cricket, women's test cricket to be precise. And in the last year and a half, we have had four women's tests, one of them being a day-night one. And there's been a lot of action in those four tests. There's been turns, there's been five-wicket hauls, and there's been some really good cricket played all around. So let's get deep into it. So, Stuff, how are you? And please take it away.
Hey, yeah, I'm doing quite good. So, there have been four women's tests since COVID began, which is it's remarkably reasonable progress on the amount of test cricket per the frequency of women's test cricket per year. Because two tests per year for 2 years. It's quite good, and it's also quite sad that that is groundbreaking numbers. But we're going to take it back to the beginning. June 2021. India played England in a test match. India's first test match in quite a while.
One of the biggest thing coming out of that game was probably the rain because until it intervened, I think it looked like one of those tests that would actually yield a result. But ultimately, even though there was a chance of getting result, irrespective of the rain, I think we got a reasonably good game out of it. I mean, yes, that was more or less a three innings, yet we got to see a lot of things. I mean, we saw there was some collapses here and there, and yet when the game ended, I think a lot of people were satisfied that they got to see such a great game of Test cricket.
Yeah, so it begins with England making a reasonable score of 396, and then India's first innings starts out quite well, but then it all falls apart, which forces India to follow on. And then India's follow-on score again has its good moments, has its bad moments, but in the end they hang on. And yeah, it was a difficult match for India, but they hang on. They saved the test. There were quite a bit of complaints about both the rain and also the match ended a little early because of bad lights. But yeah, it wasn't the worst game to end a very long hiatus from Test cricket. And one discussion point that actually came up after the match was that not only was this India's first Test match in a long time, it was the first class match most of India's players had ever played. And even for England, it was most of their players don't get to play very much first class cricket. So that was another discussion point about how good can you be at playing like this if you don't get to play this format very often.
There's a bigger like a bigger onus of the whole thing is on the cricket boards themselves because ultimately the players can only get as good as the opportunities that they get, and especially with boards like India and England who are rather well off and can afford to invest a lot more than they do right now in the women's FC setup because what we saw in in this game and across all the three innings was that there was a lot of good performances. I think what there were eight scores of 50 plus in the game itself. Some were by the same people. I think Shefali Verma got 50 plus in both the innings. So obviously there is a lot of talent available. Some of them are relatively new. Some of them are actually pretty seasoned. But ultimately, I think it boils down to the people who are supposed to be organizing this because if players cannot play the game, then how are they supposed to improve themselves? Even though we've seen, despite the lack of practice, some of the people did really well.
Both of India's openers, Sneh Rana and Shafali Verma, did quite well in that game. Verma, who was 16 at the time, no, 17 at the time.
17,
She
17.
had just turned 17 a little bit ago. She goes on and makes 96 on debut, and then gets out right after.
And the biggest surprising point of the game was probably how bad some of the rather senior players did in it because Mithali Raj or even I think Nat Silver from England side did not do much on the batting front. And even I think Smriti Mandana got 50 in the first innings, but she also got out quite early in the second innings. And I think this was a proper youngsters game because Sophie Eccleston got 8 wickets in the game, with four in the first innings, four in the second innings. Sneerana, who was also a debutant, she also got four, then went on to score that 80. And it just shows how good these people are at playing the game that is probably rooted to the basics, isn't it?
Like one interesting thing I've heard from players and people within cricket is that uh, like you have other formats and they have their strengths and weaknesses, but the best way to develop proper cricket skills is to play first class cricket. That's the reason the Intercontinental Cup existed. That was the whole impetus behind that, to get developing nations to play first class cricket, because that's the only way you can get better at specific skills which only come up in this sort of long form cricket. Yeah, a lot of the women's cricketers don't get to play any first class cricket at all. Like even England and Australia, they have very limited domestic first class seasons. So outside of the test matches, they don't get to play much. India again don't play any at all.
And this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, there's players who have done really well in the limited opportunities that they've gotten. But if you just keep spinning the wheel once a year, then I don't think you know there's going to be you know enthusiasm on either side of the sport, because obviously you want people to support their team and you want players to get better with passing time. Both things need to happen parallelly, but again, as I said, it boils down to the people who are supposed to be organizing this, and if they don't, then I don't see that development happening.
So moving on to the next game, we jump to September to 2021. So India make their trip to Australia, and on that trip, they also play a test match, a historic test match. This is the first test match, women's test, to not feature England since I think the early 2000s. And
Early there was India versus South Africa game in 2014.
all right, so the first one to not feature England since in 7 years, which is quite a long
Yep.
time.
Yep.
So we have India on a trip to Australia. Once again, the second first class match for most players in the Indian team, and Australia's first game against someone that's not England in quite a while. And yeah, take it away from there. How does the game go?
I think this game was probably, you know, ultimately going to highlight what one of the rare weakness of the Australian women's team is, because in the shorter formats, both T20 and ODI, their I think biggest strength is how they control the game. But it was one of those games where they did not have a lot of control over the proceedings, whether it be when they were bowling or when they were batting. And it showed, because I think outside of maybe Perry's innings or his innings, there was not a lot of positives for Australia coming out of the game, because India scored a big total, put Australia in, got them 240 for 9. I think they declared, so that the game could be a little more interesting. But even in the limited amount of time that the second innings got, I think India were rather comfortable, and it has been that way with India's women's team in the red ball setup, because they have beaten England in England. They have beaten South Africa in India, and obviously we have just talked about the drawn test. And then there was this test where they were in control for a big chunk of time. So that shows how good India is at red ball cricket, because that is you know you can simply attribute it to the fact that they are good at probably following the basics. That if you see someone like Mithali Raj or even Poonam Raut, this is what the batting is. I mean, they follow the basics as closely as possible, and test match is probably the format where they get the biggest amount of results in it. And as we saw, India dominated the test, and Australia, while they had some shining spots here and there, ultimately, were pretty behind in the test match, and even could have lost it if
Now, this match was played at Carrara Oval, which is not one of the traditional grounds in Australia. This is one of the outgrounds in Queensland. And this brings up another interesting point about women's test cricket. And then most of these games are played at smaller grounds, played at the non-traditional grounds in most of these countries. Now, in England, India's test in England was played at Bristol, which, while not being one of the traditional, big centers of cricket, is still a reasonably sized international ground that gets a lot of men's games as well and hosts a lot of important domestic matches. Whereas Carrara Oval is a much more low-profile ground. Uh, and the following year, as we'll get to later, uh, they play a women's test in Canberra, which is closer to a traditional ground than Carrara. And previously, they've even played games at Sydney, at the North Sydney Oval, which again is a non-traditional ground. And a lot of England's home tests have been played at Wormsley, which barely even hosts any domestic men's matches. So it brings up another interesting point about women's cricket in that you tend to not get the best grounds to play these matches in. And in addition to another issue that came up during this test match, the length of the match, they tend to not combine very well.
the biggest issue is obviously, as we have, I mean, I brought it up a little, but the rain. I mean, obviously, you already have just 4 days to, go through the proceedings. I think it's 100 overs per day, but ultimately, the rain, and combined with the fact that you have 50 overs less than men's game, which obviously there's a good chance that would be even less, because a lot of times you won't get through 100 overs on the day, even if there's no rain disruptions, because also 100 overs is a big feat to achieve in a whole day, unless you have a lot of spinners bowling the overs. And that has been an issue because, as I said, uh, I think there was a good chance that three out of these four games could have had an actual result had it not been for the rain, and combined with the fact that they were, you know they did not have a lot of time, since obviously there's 4 days, and when several sessions are washed out due to the rain, then it has to be a draw, because there's no other way around it. It is not an ODI or a T20 where you can shorten the game. It just gets down to the point where matches will be washed out, and it is not a good thing, or not even a good advertisement for the game itself, because results are what have made a test match a little more enjoyable these days. I mean, earlier, the the players used to be much more famous in general, or test matches would have a bigger crowd, but there used to be a lot of draws. But recently, I think we have seen how, particularly in men's cricket, how the number of draws has gone down drastically, and that is something that has made the game much more interesting in general. And I think this is same is the way to go with the women's cricket as well, especially as you said, some of them are not even played on you know the first choice wickets. Even the India versus South Africa game was played in Mysore. It is in in the southern India, in Karnataka, and it is also not a first choice stadium. So yep, that is something that needs to be changed, because obviously, when these games would be played on, rather, you know uh, these first choice wickets, maybe MCG, SCG, even Canberra. Yep, Canberra was at least better than playing it at Carrara. And I think I would like to bring up another point regarding the same. So, do you think the game should be extended to 5 days, or would you rather have just the number of overs, being tackled better, and maybe games being organized with respect to weather?
I would say give the option for either 4 days or 5 days, and even give an option for 3 days if it encourages more people to play Test cricket, because it's better to play it than not play it at all. Even I think it's better to play a shorter game than to not play Test cricket at all. So I think if you just give teams the options to agree on how long the match should be before, and not force them into 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, then I think that'll be the best case. Like yeah, you can manage overs better. You can be stricter on over rates to make sure they're bowling. I think the goal is 100 or 110 overs a day for 4 day matches. And yeah, like it's because like some of these matches they definitely could have made them 5 days. Like the women's Ashes test that we'll get to in a little bit, or even England India women's test match. You could probably make those 5 days, and they would get, and they would the boards would agree to it because financially it would work out. Women's Ashes test and an England India test. But for other test matches like South Africa India, they probably struggle to do a 5 day match if it could only be 5 days. They'd probably struggle to get it played because it would be very expensive. So if 4 day test being an option makes the test happen at all, then I think that's better than not playing any test cricket at all. If a 3 day test match would encourage more teams to play test cricket, then you should let them play 3 days. Yeah, again, I just think that playing test cricket at all is better than uh, trying to chase some perfect form of test cricket.
As you said, financial viability is kind of an issue with the overall existence of red ball cricket itself, which is why there's much lesser sides even in the men's cricket playing test cricket. And as I said, there's Intercontinental Cup, that particularly existed for the betterment of red ball cricket. And uh, even coming to the women's game, I think it is kind of what men's cricket was in early 2000s, where there were a lot more spinners in the game and pacers were kind of limited to bowling the early overs. And there were a lot of good pacers, but ultimately it were the spinners that would be the you know main stars of the show, to say the least. And I think same is the case here as well. I think we have seen Sneh Rana or Sophie Eggleston or even Rajeshwari Gaikwad do really well. And so, do you think that would be something that would be a big factor in as it was in these games? And could it be a big factor in the development of women's red ball cricket, because there's a lot of really good spinners, which means if they are given that kind of pitches, then we could really have some tests that could be getting good results.
Yeah, that's another thing that comes up quite a bit is that so the pitches end up not being very good because again most of these games aren't played at traditional venues, and so the pitches are more tired. The pitches haven't been maintained as well, and then you end up getting lower quality matches. But yeah, like if you encourage more women's test cricket, more women's first class cricket, they'd be more likely to play, on better tracks and get better at the game and uh, make it a more exciting thing to watch.
There's one more thing that has been a part of you know these games is usually, since we see women play a lot of ODI, and I think T20 is probably the more preferred format, where the individual innings are really short, and it is more about just mostly it's more about uh, getting the hit and just trying to move on. But then you see the kind of innings that Heather Knight played in the Ashes Test, or Cap played against England, or in the same game there was Nat Sever and Alice Davison Richards as well. So it kind of makes up a really good point for how, despite seeing them in a shorter format, you see them in this longer format without a lot of practice, and yet they are very technically proficient to play these long innings, especially with Cap, because her innings came in a time where her team was struggling really badly, and Kate Cross, and I think it was Easy Wong who had probably taken down the whole South African top order. So I think it speaks really good of the technical capabilities of these batters, doesn't it?
Let's move on to the Ashes Test match. So,
Sure.
as we mentioned, this one was in Canberra, and part of the Ashes. Because again, like most of these matches were played as part of a multi-format series. In this case, this was part of the Ashes, and it ends up going right down to the wire as England hang on by 1 wicket on the final day, while also being 12 runs short of chasing down their target.
And the best part about it was the last 2 overs, I guess, where Kate Cross scored a single run and blocked out like 10 or 11 dot balls to save the game for her team. But yeah, I think that was the test that I don't think it had any rain interruptions, did it?
I don't believe so.
It did not have any rain interruptions, and as you could see, it was going towards the result. I mean, even before England collapsed, it looked like they would chase down the target rather easily. But what we saw after that, the whole collapse, and then Sophia Custon and Kate Cross basically trying to save the game for the team, and this is basically what we were demanding. And I think this is one of those tests where we got what we wanted, didn't it?
Yeah, this was a game that had pretty much everything. You had some great innings, like especially the one from Heather Knight. You had some good bowling attacks, some solid spells, and then you had a lot of drama going right down to the end of the game as England initially played out a little for the draw, but then they really picked up the pace. But then they had a massive collapse and almost lost the match despite having the game completely within their hands. And in the end, they had to settle for a draw.
The funniest part of it was, even after all these technically proficient guys, batters like Rachel Haynes or even Heather Knight, it was someone like Sophia Dunkley who made the match more interesting, because it was her innings of, I think, 45 of 32 that actually set England on the course for the victory. And it seemed like, you know, this is the kind of game that is more suited to modern style of tests, isn't it? I mean, yes, there's guys who play the traditional way, take their time and score runs, but ultimately you will need someone like that to force a result, don't you? And we have seen Sophia Dunkley do well against India in the first test, and here again she was the one who started with the bat, and I mean, ultimately this is what you have to do for the results, because mm, test match is ultimately a slow style of, it's a format that usually moves slowly, but you need someone to speed the game up, and that's what Sophia Dunkley did, didn't she?
She really turbocharged that race to win the match because England were behind in the series at this point, the multi-format series, and really needed a win here. And they almost got there, but then once Dunkley got out, actually once Cyber got out before her, and then Dunkley followed her right after, uh, England completely lost control of the match. And then again, like they almost lost this game, a game that they had completely in the palm of their hands to win. And then in the end, they had to settle for a very, very close draw.
If you look at both teams and their first innings, it looked like the game went back and forth multiple times, because You saw how Australia had a bad start early on. Then there was Lanning and Haynes kind of resurrecting the innings. There was Talia McGrath and Ashley Gardner doing really well. And then there was England who had their own collapse. And then there was that ninth wicket stand and 10th wicket stand that got them almost got them to parity. And then the whole last day happened where there were what like 10 or 15 wickets fell on the last day. I think Australia also lost quite a few wickets on that. And I mean, that is the kind of game we wanted from the earlier ones, didn't we? Because even if a lot of these players are relatively traditional, there's also folks like Gardner who could go, go run a ball, or even there's young pacers like Sutherland who could, do what she did in this game. I think she got 5 wickets overall, three in the second innings, two in the first innings, and she was the one who brought the test to the point where it was almost won by Australia. So I guess youngsters are the biggest part of this game, aren't they? I think we can move on to the fourth test, which was probably the shortest of these four, but actually it had of some of the best performances, I guess. I mean, there were 300s in it. There was also some really good bowling, and I think even though the other tests went on longer and this one did not get a lot of time, but it still had a lot of memorable things, especially that net saver innings or that first bowling spell from England Pacers. I think it was something very, something remarkable to see, these young bowlers bowling with the new red ball. And I think uh, it was Kate Cross and Izzy Wong who pulled the first spell, and it was pretty memorable to see, all these very traditional style of dismissals.
Yes, so we're moving to Taunton for England versus South Africa in June of this year. This is South Africa's first test match since they played India in 2014. And once again, has some of the same problems we talked about earlier. This was played at Taunton, a non traditional international ground, although it does host a lot of domestic cricket. It was, rain affected the match, and it also ended up just running out of time because there just wasn't enough time to get a result done.
The whole issue with a 4-day game is if you lose a session or two, you're already kind of on course for the draw. And this was probably that kind of test because once I think the rain interrupted on day three, I think, and then you more or less knew because there were still almost two complete innings to go, and looked like we won't get a result. And that's what happened because on the fourth day we got what, one session or a little more than one session, and ultimately it ended up being a draw. So I mean, we have already talked about it. If there's any possible measure to cut out these draws or maybe make the games more interesting. But again, I mean, what I mean, let's. I mean, if I put you in, put you in kind of a spot and ask you if there's anything that could have been done here, then is there anything that you can even think of that could have, made it a little more interesting, or could there be any way to have these games not be a draw almost instantly when a session is washed out?
Well, the idea is that they bowl more overs, but and while the over rate in women's cricket is generally quicker than it is in men's, it's not significantly enough to be able to get the goal of 100, 110 overs in, especially if the session gets washed out. Because not only because if rain comes, not only do you lose a full session, you also probably lose some time at night because it'll be cloudy and the conditions won't be as bright, so you'll end up getting off the field early. And yeah, like it's again, like we talked about this earlier, it's difficult because if you have shorter matches, more of them will probably end up in draws. But if you force every match to be longer, you'll probably get fewer matches because it just becomes too expensive for most nations to justify the costs. So again, like I would be wary of forcing all matches to be 5 days because we need everything to be perfect. That's the only way you get a perfect match. No, I don't think that's what you should be doing. But I do, but yeah, it is a problem where if you get even some rain, then it becomes very difficult to finish a match within 4 days, especially on more sluggish and tired pitches, which don't give as much help to the bowlers throughout the game.
One big issue with specifically these teams is that both South Africa and England do not have a lot of spinners. I mean, if you look at teams like India or Australia who have three or four, regular spinners, then obviously the game would move at a faster pace in general. But with South Africa, you had someone like Sune Loose who no, she does not bowl that often. There's Laba, who was the main spinner in this game, and she bowled 22 overs. But Sunil, she bowled like what, 10 overs. And on the other hand, then you have Sophie Eccleston, who is basically the lone spinner for England because everyone else there's I think Emma Lamb who bowled a few, but again she's a part timer, so you can't really count a lot on her, or even Heather Knight, who sometimes bowls part time off spin. So there isn't a really viable way around it because, again, I mean, if the teams do not have that kind of player, you cannot really force them to play someone that they do not want to in a certain situation. So does it bring up, you know, then does that benefit teams like India or Australia? Because then there's the whole thing about pitches in India supporting spinners, and basically that opens up kind of a discussion where obviously India will have a much better chance of hosting the games and a much better chance of getting the results as well.
Yeah, like it helps, but again, like I'd be wary of saying, "Oh, it never rains in India during cricket matches. It never rains in Australia during cricket matches." It does, and it happened. And if you keep forcing the narrative that it only ever rains in England, so don't play games in England, then you're sort of left a little. It looks a little silly when it rains somewhere else and ruins this game in the same way that it would have in England. Again, like India has a major advantage for hosting cricket matches in the fact that they have so many grounds all over the country that are reasonably well maintained. Like I know the spectator experience isn't always amazing, but the grounds themselves, they're there, and a lot of them are willing to host matches because isn't a lot of opportunity for them to host India matches. Uh, and yeah, assisting spin to make the over rate go faster also helps a lot. But yeah, like you need to be again, like you just need to be wary of forcing down one way to do women's test cricket into the game because make if you make it so that only this can only happen in one way, then you really risk damaging the sport by it not being by being too homogenous and being too predictable.
Obviously, now that you have brought up that point, I mean, if you put it the other way, and you have pitches that are probably greener or have a lot of movement of the pitch, then I think the players are just that skilled that they would ultimately counter that. I think there's a lot of players in women's cricket who play seam or swing better than the men's cricketers do, and it has shown in these games itself, because there was, in the Taunton game there was actually a lot of movement for the Pacers, and yet there were multiple hundreds scored. So does it look like then, as I said, you cannot push a single narrative? Then does that kind of doom the whole result finding process? Because then I don't think you really have a way to consistently get games that end up with one team winning or one team losing.
Most first class matches are 4 days, and most of them do get results. So I don't see why women's test cricket would not be able to get results consistently. The issue is just that you end up, if you play 2 tests a year, and some of these teams play a test once every 7 years. That's how long it took for South Africa to play a test match again. That's how long it took for India to play a test match again. Most of these teams come into these matches under a lot of pressure to perform, to not lose. So that encourages them to play it more slowly. And if you're unlucky enough to get rain, it makes it harder to get a result. Like there's a lot of underlying factors to make sure that the last 7 test matches, the last 6 women's test matches have all been draws. And it's not just because of the way test cricket is structured, because you have a lot of cricket that's structured this way and they still consistently get results. It's just that, for women's cricket, if you play them on tired pitches, if the women are not playing much first class cricket outside of test cricket, if you treat every match as this match will define the future of women's test cricket, they better put on a great show, otherwise it threatens the future of women's test cricket, then you're never going to get anywhere. You need to, the only way for women's test cricket to get better, I feel, is for them to just play more of it, to make it a more accepted thing, and then players can start playing with a little less pressure. Administrators can prepare these games with a little less pressure. If they have more fun with it, then you'll see a lot more fun coming out of it and make it a more fun experience to watch. And I think that about covers it for today. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.